This is Chuck Stegner. The date is January 25th, 1986. It's 1:30 p.m. and I am sitting on the patio at 113 Boeing in Venture Out, Mesa, Arizona. It's a beautiful day and the temperature is running about 72 degrees at 1:30 p.m. Gorgeous weather. We've been here since January 6th, which makes it about, I guess 19 days. And we have enjoyed possibly the nicest January weather in the Phoenix, Arizona area that they've ever experienced. It's my intention to make this tape a history of my life, and surprisingly it is not that easy to do. You wonder where you should start and all the things that you can remember which should be included. But I guess I should start with Slope County, North Dakota. My father was Harry A. Stegner, Harry Austin Stegner, and my mother was Ethel Pearl Lidstrom Stegner. They were married on June 12th, 1912, and started their life together on my father's homestead. He had homesteaded in Connor Township, Slope County, North Dakota, in 1906, along with his brother Fred Stegner. Their homesteads were, at the near corner, just half a mile apart. Their home farmstead, Philo's, was in the northeast quarter of Section 10, 13400, and his brother Fred was in the northwest quarter of, I guess, Section 2. Anyway, their farm homes were about a mile apart. I was one of 5 children. My sister Idell, who was a year older than I, my sister Grace, just almost 2 years younger than I, my brother John J. Stegner, commonly called Jack, who was 9 years and 3 months younger than I, and my sister Anne Lorraine, the baby of the family, who was born in 1924 in September. I shouldn't say. I guess I don't remember. Anyway, she's a couple of years younger than my brother Jack. When my parents were married, they didn't have a home on the homestead. I think my father had built a little shack that he lived in. When he was there, he, I'm sure, was gone as much as the law would allow him to be gone and still qualify as a homesteader. He worked at various jobs as a salesman and did a lot of traveling, and he was doing that before he was married and for some time after. To start with, they rented what was known as the Powell home, which was south and east of where we lived, 2 or 3 miles, in a rented home there. And my sister, Idell, was born in the Powell home. I don't know just when they built the old farm home, but since she was born in 1913 and I was born in 1914, and since the house was not built when she was born, and I was born in that house, that pins it down fairly close. The house was a 4-room, 1-story, with a half-story above, I guess. The roof came down to the eaves of the first floor, and that made an area above the first floor, the center of which was of height able to live in. It had a lean-to on the west side, which one half was used as a kind of an entry room from the outside into the kitchen, and the other end an extra bedroom. The 4 rooms were all connected. The kitchen was in the northwest corner of the house, the dining room in the southwest corner, the living room in the southeast corner, and my parents' bedroom in the northeast corner. There were doors connecting in all the rooms and an archway between the dining room and living room. And small kids at that time found great pleasure in running around from one room to the other in a full circle and then just continuing that. I noticed my grandchildren indulge in the same activity. There was no bathroom in the house. There was a pretty decent walk-in closet in my folks' bedroom, and my earliest memory were of a heating stove which was in the interior corner of the living room. It was a big old stove about 5 feet high, and the legs were probably 4 feet square on it. Heavy thing. And we fired that up with coal. It vented into a chimney in the very corner of the house. And in the kitchen there was a range in the inside corner, a coal range which vented into the same chimney. It was a very plain home, shingle roof, frame construction, which somewhere along the line in, I guess, the early of the 30s, my father stuccoed the outside, which I think made it much warmer. To my knowledge, there was no insulation in it anywhere. It was common 2x4 walls, framed on one side and a lath and plaster on the inside. On the east end, there was a porch built at the same time the house was, I'm sure, and fairly good sized. You left the living room through the outside east door and then walked across the porch and out onto the yard from there. Originally it was screened, and I can remember pleasant nights of sleeping in the summertime on that screened porch. Later on, to be able to utilize that area a little longer in the year, my father had enclosed it with windows, so it was an enclosed porch later. There wasn't a lot of furniture in the house. We had an old, what we call Davenport, which was I think a leather-covered sofa that opened up into a bed at night. A square living room table we referred to, probably 4 by 6 feet, 5 feet, and a piano, and probably a couple of easy chairs, maybe rocking chairs. And that was the living room. The dining room had a central dining table that opened up into conventional large dining room table for big dinners, and a set of dining room chairs that went with it. The old golden oak furniture that in later years became so popular for refinishing. Between the kitchen and the dining room was a set of cupboard that opened to both sides. You could put a plate into that cupboard from the kitchen side, and then reach right in from the dining room side to set the table. In the kitchen was a good-sized cast iron range that we used to burn coal with, and had a big oven, and on the back side was what we called a reservoir, which was a little compartment that maybe held about 4 gallons of water, and if you filled that with water and had a fire in the stove, then there was always warm water there. This was used, well, you could take a dipper of warm water clear diagonally across the room to where there was a sink, where we all washed ourselves, and pour that dipper of warm water into a basin in the sink and wash your hands and face before meals and or any other time as far as that goes. But there was no running water in the house. In the corner that the sink was in, there was an old-style hand-operated pump, and out in the corner of outside the corner of the house, in that area was a cistern that had been dug down, just a hole in the ground about, I suppose a circle of 8 feet in diameter and maybe 12 feet deep. Maybe 14 feet deep. I'm just guessing from memory. The roof of the house had a rain gutter all the way around it, and that gutter emptied into this cistern. So that when the rain came down, it was all collected in the cistern. And that's where the pump lifted the water to the sink. Now, at times when there wasn't enough rain or we were using more water than was available, we would, from time to time, fill that cistern with water from some outside source. As a teenager, I hauled water from my Uncle Fred's farm, and there was a big spring over about 2 miles northeast of the hall, and at times I hauled water from there. It seems though we never had an adequate supply of water, but I'll go into that a little later. In my earliest recollection, there were no built-in cupboards in that kitchen, and I think my mother was probably one of the more forward-thinking homemakers, because she designed a built-in set of what we would now call cabinets for the north side of the kitchen north wall. I remember the countertop there was made of 1.5 inch absolutely clear white pine, which would be on the expensive side these days. I remember how nice that wood was when it was installed. I remember that, the installation of that kitchen. A Swedish carpenter by the name of Dedvik built it, and he was down there for, I suppose a couple of weeks building that thing, built to my mother's specification. One of the things she always regretted was that she did not make allowances for a toe space underneath the building, so that as you stood to lean, to be up close to the countertop, you had to lean forward. There wasn't room for your toes to fit in there. I suspect now nobody paid much attention to that because all cabinets have a sort of a toe space on. But hers didn't include that. But remember that she designed it herself. She didn't have any book to go by. At different times, there was a small table in the kitchen that if just one or two people were eating a lunch there, why we used to eat off. There was always a waste pail, more crudely referred to as a slop bucket. And there all of the liquid garbage was collected, and every probably once or twice a day somebody had to carry that, usually about a 5-gallon pail, out to, well, usually if we had any hogs, it went to the hog. They utilized all the garbage from the house. Other times, I guess, we even fed that the chicken. It did not normally include the dishwater, if I remember correctly, but I'm not sure. I've emptied on many a slop pail, and I can't remember whether it included the dishwater or not. I think that pretty well describes the home. For many years, the top floor, above your ceiling joists on the main floor, the only finishing was the floor. Somewhere along the line, again, I think in the early 30s, they enclosed that somewhat to make one room on it. And that was normally my room. I shouldn't say normally, it was always my room. My two sisters occupied the room to the west of the house. I haven't explained how we got to the upstairs, off the dining room, with a door that led into just a tiny hall, and directly across the hall was, you entered what was the west lean-to of the house. And there the stairs went upstairs too. Straight flight of stairs up to the next floor. The dining room, which had a south exposure, also had a bay window. And I guess I could never remember a time that my mother didn't have plants growing in that bay window. Years later, I shouldn't say years later, again in the 30s perhaps, my father modernized the heating plant in the home. And again, I guess I haven't described the basement, or more probably actually a cellar. From the kitchen directly under the stairs that went upstairs from the dining room, from the kitchen there were stairs going downstairs. And this way led into what was originally just a dugout space. When they built for home, they dug out a hole there, and this was utilized originally primarily as a root cellar, storing potatoes primarily, and some cabbage or more rutabagas or turnips, that sort of vegetable. In the 30s, I guess exactly 1930, because I remember I was 16 years old. And since I was born in 14, that would make it. My father put in a hot water heating plant. And this was Pretty modern plant first time. Didn't require any electricity whatsoever. Totally what they call gravity circulation. And a boiler in the cellar that heated the water, and as it was heated, it automatically circulated through the radiator. Even though there was a radiator in every room on the ground floor, including the bedroom and the lean-to. 5 rooms that were heated by that wood hot water heating system. We dug out in some additional space and put a little chute into it, and there we filled that space with coal. It was really a coal bin, and fired the boiler with the coal from that coal bin. In the dining room, the radiator was situated right inside of the bay window. That posed a problem because in the wintertime my mother couldn't keep plants there. It was too warm for it. In the summertime, when the heater boiler wasn't working, then it again made a fine place for plants. Later on also, perhaps in the early 30s, my father installed a 32-volt light plant, which was primarily used for lights. Power plant, but we literally had no other power utensils or appliances other than the light. It was not big enough to run a refrigerator, and I really can't remember whether we used it for any small appliances or not. When the radio came into popularity, we used the 32-volt power to power the radio. And originally that 32-volt power plant was powered with a generator and a gasoline engine, which was also in the cellar. Later on, when windmills to generate electricity became more popular, we had one of those. And as long as the wind blew, we had lots of lights in the home. Generally speaking, the 32-volt was a pretty defendable source of light, and very seldom was it not working. I should say at this time that I'm depending on my memory to make this as accurate as my memory will allow. On thinking back, I'm sure now that we did have some appliances that used the 32-volt electricity. One would be a washing machine. This was a rather cumbersome washing machine with a dasher in the middle and a wringer on top, and an electric motor underneath that we had to manhandle into the kitchen on wash days and carry the water in and heat it on the range, and then dump it in the washing machine and wash the clothes and wring them out and take them outside and hang them up. And somewhere along the line, I'm sure that the farm home had a refrigerator that worked on 32 volt. I'm sure that it was there after World War II when I lived in that home with my wife for 4 years. But and thinking back in the 30s when we first got the 32 volt light plant, I don't remember any refrigerator. Another area that I haven't mentioned that I should was the furniture in the dining room included a china closet that my mother had acquired about the time she was married. I make particular mention of this because that same china closet is in our home in Grangeville, Idaho. Rather interesting story about it. Uh, my mother acquired that china closet, and I'm not sure, but I kind of suspect it might have come from Montgomery Ward. And in perusing old catalogs of about the years that my folks were married, it would be reasonable to suppose that the china closet cost about $12.50. Somewhere along the line, I think about 1919 or 1920, my parents moved with the family from the farm homestead near Amadon, North Dakota, to Bismarck, the state capital, about 150 miles, where my father was in the insurance business, life insurance, with his brother Harvey. Now, we had a nice little home in Bismarck and lived there about a year, I think. The last year or two, I've tried to get a little more information about that part of our family history, but don't seem to come up with any conclusive dates. I remembered because to the best of my knowledge, the first school I attended was at Bismarck. And I think I was probably 5 going on 6 when I did that. That would have been 1919. I would have been 5 years old on August 13th, 1919, and it might have been the winter of 1919 and 20 that I remember. I don't remember a lot about it. I remember being late for school one time and afraid to go in, and so I went home. Then I was afraid to go in the house at home, and I was in by the side of the house, and my father happened to spot me. Boy, I will never forget how excited he became because I wasn't in school. We moved back to, getting back to china closet, my mother had a pretty good friend, Mrs. Addie Revling, farm woman there. She had a little girl, and the little girl died of congenital diabetes, which was a really horrible thing for a small child in those days. They hadn't learned the use of insulin then, and that little girl made a vivid impression on my memory. I suspect she died when she was 8 or 9 years old. But Mrs. Revling, her mother, was a friend of my mother's, and when my mother moved to Bismarck, she sold the china closet to Addie for $2.50, with the stipulation that if she ever moved back to the farm, she wanted to buy it back for the same price. Of course, they did move back to the farm, and my mother exercised her option to buy it back, and Addie Revling was not too happy about that. Years later, in 1949, what I suspect would have been 30 years later, my father turned all the household goods over to me, and in the fall of 1949 I had a sale and I sold most of the household goods, but those items that we wanted to keep and move to Idaho were not sold at the sale. I remember I didn't think much about the china closet, and I would have sold it at the sale had it not been that my wife wanted it. But she insisted on keeping that, and I must admit that I was later grateful that she did. Anyway, when we came to move to Idaho, I had my own truck, and I loaded it up with what furniture we had, and that china closet, being so much glass, was hard to pack, and I just didn't have a place for it. So remembering what my mother had done when she moved to Bismarck, I took the china closet up to Addie Revling and told her I would give it to her unless at some time I could get it to Idaho, and then I'd ask for it back. I don't know, 3 or 4 months after I'd been in Idaho, I drove back to North Dakota with a truck, primarily to pick up a tractor that I had at Bismarck. But we'd taken some quilts along for packing and stopped at Addie Revling's house in December of 1949. A bitterly cold night, about 20 below zero, at about 8 o'clock, and on short notice asked her to return our china closet. She was really upset about that. She was getting old and a little crotchety then, and she said, Charles, she said, I want you to know this is the second time that's happened. And she had a lot of nice dishes. She had that thing loaded with dishes, and she had, of course, had to unload the china closet and give it up on the spur of the moment. But that's the same china closet that currently is in our home in Grangeville, Idaho.